I'm glad today to have part of our family with us. And there's a young man back there graduating from high school, Sebastian. Next week? Is it next Saturday, graduation? This Saturday, this coming Saturday. That's what I asked. I'd have him up here, except he's got his church clothes on. They're holy. That's perfectly all right. He would have been valedictorian of his class, but he didn't want to show everybody up, so he just made good grades. But he has plans to go to Jonesboro College. Is that up by Jonesboro? Yeah, on a wrestling scholarship. We congratulate him today. And yeah, that's a great job. Now I forgot where I was. I had a little trouble with my voice today. How many different words is there for mother? Well, I don't think we know all of them, but we got several. Mom, that's what I call my mother, Mom. Mommy, some people use that word. Ma, Mommy, Madre, and the one I wrote down that I don't ever remember using because I knew better, my old lady. I don't want to hear that around here. Isn't that amazing? Just, I don't know what you called your mother, but I know it was with affection. We are going to go to the book of John, chapter 2, verse 1 through 5, and I'm just going to add some things to the story that Carla get, and in just a minute I'm going to have Carla come read a paper for us. John chapter 2. The next day there was a wedding celebration in the village of Cana in Galilee. Carla said that the weddings lasted a whole week. I think she meant to say the wedding celebration lasted a whole week. Jesus' mother was there, and Jesus and his disciples were also invited to the celebration. The wine supply ran out during the festival, so Jesus' mother told him, they have no more wine. Dear woman, that's not our problem, Jesus replied. My time has not yet come. But his mother told the servants, do whatever he tells you to do. And I think I can visualize what transpired here. The wine ran out, and Mary went to where Jesus was, and she said, they don't have any more wine. And he replied, that's not my problem. And Mary said to the servants, do whatever he tells you to do, and turned around and walked off. A discussion between a son and a mother. Well, today's message is a little different from the normal because we're not only here to worship the Lord, we're here today to honor our mothers and grandmothers and all the other mothers. It's a day of greeting and expressions of love for all of the mothers. When God created woman in the Garden of Eden for Adam, it was a great day for all of creation. Of all of God's great creations, the woman was as important, maybe some sense more important than all of it. I'm going to ask Carla to come read a little paper for us, and if she's got it, and maybe she's got it memorized, I don't know.
No. So, this is a story about creation, but it's not the story of the Bible. So don't go looking for it in the Bible because it's not there. And this is what Irma Bombeck, who was kind of a humorous columnist back in the 60s and 70s, she kind of thought this up as how it might have happened. When the good Lord was creating mothers, he was into his sixth day of overtime when the angel appeared and said, "You're doing a lot of fiddling around on this one." And God said, "Have you read the specs on this order? She has to be completely washable, but not plastic. Have 180 movable parts, all replaceable. Run on black coffee and leftovers. Have a lap that disappears when she stands up. A kiss that can cure anything from a broken leg to a disappointed love affair. And 6 pairs of hands." The angel shook her head slowly and said, "6 pairs of hands? No way. It's not the hands that are causing me problems," God remarked. "It's the 3 pairs of eyes that mothers have to have." "That's on the standard model?" asked the angel. God nodded. "1 pair that sees through closed doors when she asks, 'What are your kids doing in there?' She already knows. Another here in the back of her head that sees what she shouldn't, but what she has to know. And of course the ones here in the front that can look at a child when he goofs up and say, 'I understand and I love you,' without so much as uttering a word. This one heals herself when she's sick, can feed a family of 6 on 1 pound of hamburger, and can get a 9-year-old to stand under a shower." The angel circled the model of a mother very slowly. "It's too soft," she sighed. "But tough," said God excitedly. "You can imagine what this mother can do or endure." "Can it think?" "Not only can it think, but it can reason and compromise," said the Creator. Finally, the angel bent over and ran her finger across the cheek. "There's a leak," she pronounced. "I told you were trying to put too much into this model." "It's not a leak," said the Lord. "It's a tear." "What's it for?" "It's for joy, sadness, disappointment, pain, loneliness, and pride."
It has been estimated by the time a child reaches 18 that a mother has done an extra 18,000 hours of child-generated work. That's a lot of work. 18 just for the child. That's, you know. Well, in the Bible, there's a lot of good descriptions, portraits of motherhood. If you think of the mother of Moses, when she put him in the basket and sailed him down the Nile River, I believe her intuition already knew what would transpire. I think she knew what Pharaoh's daughter did every day by going down to the river to bathe. And God gave Moses' mother insight to know what to do with her child, since Pharaoh had put out the word, "Kill every one of the boys that are out there." And so down the river she sent him. And then even Pharaoh's daughter that adopted Moses, the woman who found him, her servants found him, the woman who cared for him, she took a big chance because she was violating the law that her father had established, that all the Hebrew children or boys would be killed. Proverbs 31 tells us about the mother of King Lemuel. And I've read this many times for you here, and you might want to look again in the book of Proverbs, chapter 31, who gave godly advice for her son when it came to living. Not only that, how to pick a good wife. Do you remember the story where a mother told King Solomon to give her child to another woman to save the child? You know, the sword was going to divide it in half, and the mother said, "Oh no, don't do that." If it means that, you remember those stories. In today's scripture, the mother of Jesus, in particular, the wedding at the Cana of Galilee, where she asked him to do his first ever recorded miracle. But before I get into the text today, I want to give you a few little stories. How many of you have read comics in the newspaper? I love them. Years ago, the paper was more popular than it is now. You can't afford to buy paper, but anyway, some of you do maybe. I mean, does anybody get the newspaper anymore at all? How many of you read the news on the net? Oh, just one of you? You know what's happening in the world today? Calvin and Hobbes. Anybody ever read Calvin and Hobbes? Comic strip. Some of you are shaking your head. One day Calvin is pictured standing by his mother's bed. Hey, Mom, wake up. I made you a Mother's Day card. My, how sweet of you, she said. I did it all by myself. The mother said, go ahead and read it. Calvin said, go ahead and read it. She begins to read. I'm going to buy a card with heart. Let me back up. I was going to buy a card with hearts and pink and red flowers on it. But then I thought I'd rather spend the money on myself instead. It was awful hard to buy things when one's allowance is so small. So I guess you're pretty lucky I got you anything at all. So I guess you're pretty lucky. Happy Mother's Day. There, I've said it, now I'm done. So how about getting out of bed and fixing breakfast for your son? And it was signed Calvin. I'm deeply moved, said Mother. Did you notice the part about my allowance, he says? You know, come on. He was very self-centered. He was using Mother's Day to get something for himself. Carol went to a meeting one evening. Her husband and children decided that they would do something special for Mom. So they cleaned up the kitchen. They put away all the food, wiped all the counters down, washed all the pots and pans, and put the dishes in the dishwasher. They even remembered to rinse. They swept and mopped the floor. 2 hours later, she came home from a meeting, glanced at the kitchen, took off her coat, grabbed the remote, and popped down in front of the TV. Dad and the children were surprised that she hadn't even said anything about all the hard work. They followed her into the family room and just kind of stood there looking at her. She looked up and said, "What?" Her husband said, "The kitchen, the kitchen." "The kitchen what?" He said, "Well, we cleaned it all up for you. Didn't you notice?" She said, "Oh yeah, thankless job, isn't it?" Kind of put them in their place, didn't he? A man came home from work one day, found his 3 small children outside still in pajamas playing in the mud. Some of their toys were scattered across the lawn and on the driveway. The door of his wife's car was wide open, so was the front door of the house. Surprised at this, he rushed into the house inside and was confronted with the evidence of complete disarray. A lamp had been knocked over, the TV was loudly blaring a cartoon channel, and the family room was littered with toys and children's clothing. He went into the kitchen. The sink was filled with dirty dishes, breakfast food spilled all over the counter. The refrigerator door was open. The dog food was scattered all over the floor. Very concerned now, and fearing the worst, he frantically began to look for his wife. Heading upstairs, stepping over toys and more piles of clothes as he went, he was worried she might be ill or that something serious had happened to her. Rushing into the bedroom, he saw her, still in her pajamas. She lay curled up on their bed, reading a novel. She looked up and smiled at him and asked how his day had been. Completely bewildered, he looked at her and asked, "What happened here today?" Again, she smiled and then answered, "You know, every day when you come home from work, you ask me what in the world I had been doing all day long." "Yes," he said. Then she answered, "Well, you know now." Let me give you one more before I get into the text. This is about grandmothers. One day a little girl was sitting and watching her mother do the dishes. Suddenly she noticed that her mother had several strands of white hair sticking out of her brunette head. The little girl asked, "Why are some of your hair white? What hair is white, Mommy?" The woman replied smugly, "Well, every time you do something wrong, makes me cry and unhappy, and one of my hairs turns white." The little girl thought for a moment and then said, "So how come my grandmother's hair is all white?" That went over some of your head. You missed it. Now back to our story this morning in the scriptures. I couldn't help but give some of those to you this morning. We're going to look at the wedding feast at the Cana of Galilee. His ministry of miracles all began at this wedding feast, while a couple was celebrating their wedding day. Cana was not even in Judah. Did you know that? It was a little town off the beaten path, and there was no reason for them to be there. Most likely they had been invited to the wedding, which lasted 7 days. That is, Jesus and his disciples. There was no reason for them to be there, but they were invited to this wedding. Mary, Joseph, and some of his disciples were dressed in their best clothes, enjoying the food and companionship with joy for the bridal couple. Now, in those days, the wedding festival, as Carla said, lasted a whole week. I don't know how we'd do that this way. I mean, I couldn't afford to have Carla's wedding celebration last a whole week. I'd go broke or be broke before I got into it, but they did. Often the whole town was invited. Now, this little town of Cana was only about 500 people in the whole town. And it was considered an insult not to show up when the whole town had been invited. Jesus was on a mission to save the whole world, but he took time out of his ministry to go celebrate a wedding. We may be tempted sometime to think that we don't need to take time out to celebrate for someone else. But if Jesus can do it, so can we. Taking time with our loved ones. I enjoy those times. But this feast, and at the feast, we know, was Mary, the mother of Jesus. Now, tradition says that Joseph had died some years prior to this. Mary's oldest son was the key to the family's success. Who was Mary's oldest son? Jesus was. Now, some think that Mary was the bride, akin to the bride and groom. There is some speculation that Mary was in charge of all the party, the whole party. And her job was to be sure the servants did what they were supposed to do. The feast was spread, the wine was served, and everyone was having a good time. In fact, excuse me. I'm so sorry. In a short time, the wine jars were drained. I don't know if somebody had too much to drink or what happened, or there was a vast amount of people. And Mary did not become frantic at all. Mary, the woman, knew what to do. Most women know what to do when things go awry, or they figure it out pretty quick. And so she called the servants and led them to where Jesus was. And she said to her son, "We're out of wine." And in the passage of Scripture, the indication was that Jesus said, "My time is not yet. It's not time for me to come bring my ministry of performing miracles yet." And I paraphrase a little bit here. I think Mary thought that's what you think. She said, "We're out of wine." And he said, "Woman, dear woman, that's not our problem." Now, I'm here to tell you that if I'd called my mother woman, I'd have got backslapped. How many of you ever called your mother woman? You knew better. But you know what? In this setting, in this biblical day, it was an honor for a child to call her mother woman. After all, when God created the female, he called her woman. Adam, and Eve. Did you know in this setting, Jesus said woman for the first miracle that Jesus ever did? When was the last time he called her woman? As she stood at the foot of the cross and she said to John, "This is your mother," and to the woman, "This is your son." So don't be set with the idea that woman is a bad thing. So Jesus and Mary had this conversation. And Jesus knew that his mother was not a happy camper at that time. Have you ever heard the expression, "If mom ain't happy, ain't nobody happy"? He honored his mother. I think that's the reason he performed this miracle, because he loved his mother so much that he didn't want her to be embarrassed. And all she said, and that was the end of the conversation with her and Jesus, but she said to the servants, "Whatever he says to you to do it." In other words, obedience is better than sacrifice. Just your servants, just whatever he says. And I think Mary went back to her business of greeting the crowd, and "We're so happy you're here today." And the bridegroom, have you met the bridegroom yet? You need the bride and the groom yet? You need to go see them and shake their hands. All week long, people were migrating through that house. We see the wedding feast, we see the woman, but now we want to see the wine. John 2:16 says this, "Standing nearby was 6 stone water jars." You know what the water jars were for? The servants had brought water jars into the house because they bathed the feet of everybody that came into the house with that water. They would take that dipper pitcher and fill up the water pans where you washed your feet. Take out some more, dip it. And Jesus said, "Fill the jars with water." And I wonder if they said, as Carla expressed it, "Fill it with water." What's that going to do for us? But nevertheless, they did what he said do. Again, obedience is better than sacrifice. And so they got them all filled up again. Someone said maybe as much as 100 gallons of the various pots that they brought. And when they got it all done, here's something you need to understand. God, through Jesus Christ, performs miracles when he gets ready. He's not on our time schedule. They did not serve one drop of this wine until all the pots were full. And he said, "Now dip out some and take it to the master of ceremonies." Would that be the bride, or bridegroom? Or would there be somebody else in charge? When God does something, he does it greatly. And the expression was, Mary, if she was in charge of the wedding, why did you wait till last to produce such wonderful wine? It's the best that we've had all week long. God's not cheap. Now, I don't know the various brands of wine at all. I just, years ago, happened to be a black man in our community that every Friday night, the boss man would give him a gallon of wine to take home with him for the weekend. And they tell me, and I don't know, but they tell me it was some cheap wine and he stayed drunk all weekend and then went back to work on Monday morning. That's tragic to me. But here these people were sampling the wine. The water turned into wine. Jesus demonstrated his authority over everything. He wanted to honor his mother. And that's what we're doing today. We want to honor our mothers the best way we can. Now, you don't have the ability to turn water into wine or anything else, but you can love her. You can show her how much you appreciate her. John chapter 20, verse 31 says this, "But these are written so that you may continue to believe that Jesus is the Messiah, the Son of God, and that by believing in him you will have life by the power of his name." So Jesus departed from that wedding feast and began to perform miracle after miracle after miracle. That was the only one. I don't think I could preach all year long on the miracles of Jesus and still not get the in-depth story that we all need. But I appreciate the fact that Jesus showed us that we need to honor our mother. That's the purpose. Honoring God by honoring our mother. And so we say to you this day, mothers, we honor you. We love you. And we appreciate all that you do, and I can't express that enough. God bless you. Shall we stand?